point to the next big or the bigger paper in their market. So if you're an editor in Kampala and you're editing the New Vision, then it was the Monitor. If you told them then, as I did some editors, that their biggest competition was the telecom company, the biggest telecom company, they would probably think you were with Lydia in the bar that evening. So the biggest competition then and now, then it was your rival. Today, your biggest competition is the guy who has the pipe and the guy who has the network effect. So the guy who has the pipe is the telephone company, because people don't, well, they complain a bit, the South Africans complain about the cost of data and everyone else. But the telephone guy is getting data revenue every day, regardless of what you're going to use it for. The next guy is the guy who has the network effect. That is Facebook, that is Google, and all these other network spaces. So the competition now, if you're a newspaper publisher, your biggest competitor is probably Facebook, because more people are reading your content via Facebook than are coming to your website. Now that changes very many considerations. It means that you probably won't have the kind of traffic that allows you to demand the revenues that you need to continue publishing. It also means that when Facebook comes to you with instant articles, or Google comes to you with Google News, you're probably lucky to even have a conversation with them, because they become the marketplace. That's where people are going to consume this content. Now, that cuts both ways. One is that people who generate interesting content, the cut videos and so on and so forth, can probably game the system and get a bit of money. It's not sustainable. The guys who are aggregating, the 236 that you speak about, All Africa, they only exist because someone else is producing the original content. You can't run away from the content. So the doomsday scenario is you arrive at a time when the original content producers can no longer sustain themselves. You don't have newsrooms that are sending people out to go and find and report these stories and do these videos and so on and so forth. And the aggregators will probably move on to the next cut videos and so on and so forth. But we will all be the poorer for it, because you would have lost that trusted voice that tells you this has happened, and you then don't need to check with someone else, because you believe that when this outlet says this has happened, then I believe them. So I think we keep going around and we come back to the basic question of what is the business model that will sustain journalism in the long run. And clickbaiting is just one small symptom of a problem.
Right. I don't know whether Thomas here and Eric have anything to add before I just open up to the floor.
Yeah, let me just briefly touch on what Lydia have mentioned. Now, Lydia talked about the issue of false news, like the 3 wives thing. And then she also said that even on the newspapers make mistakes as well. Now, I think there is a distinction here. Now, with clickbaiting, there is a willful desire. There is a willful desire to produce false news. Now, within the traditional media, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it is minimized. Now, what you have, what you basically have, is more of sensationalism. Now, and we must be able to distinguish sensationalism as well with what is happening on social media in terms of the fake headlines. Like just last month, some Nigerian online papers floated a news story that with the arrival of the new Prime Minister in Britain, is now visa-free for all Commonwealth citizens. There were even Ugandan online papers that said Ugandans will now enjoy free visa to the UK. And like in West Africa, this created a panic, because some people were actually calling the Foreign Office to find out whether this thing is true. Now, and that's my problem with social media, because there is this willful desire to put online something that is false. Now I know in the traditional media, sensationalism has been there for a very long time. But then, in terms of sensationalism, there's always an element of truth. What the media does is that it tries to blow out of proportion that thing which actually has a sense of truth in it. But then on the other hand, with social media, it's a different thing altogether.
Thanks, Thomas. Eric?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add a little thing here before we pass it on, and it'll be exciting to hear what everybody has to say. You know, there are a number of things that are in place in terms of how public communications, if I can call it that, continues to survive and grow. The technology is in place. It's improving at its own pace, but it's in place. The need, the hunger for good content is there. We don't need to recreate that. What we are actually talking about now, what we are really trying to wrap our heads around is how do we produce good content? What, I think you asked, what is good content? And my answer to that is good content is what the people need. Good content is what people want. So the big question for everybody who wants to get into this business has to be, how do I determine what people want? And if you can take a scientific approach to that and you get it right, I think these problems we're talking about will be things of the past or things you take on readily. You know, I spend most of my life now just looking at how media in Africa is performing. In country after country, you look at all the major newspapers, Daniel, and everybody else, you know, look at all the major newspapers. They give you the same nature, not the quality, but the same nature of content every day. I cannot believe that in this continent with such of great diversity, that we all agreed that politics is that one area where we should source for content every day. It just doesn't make sense. So I believe that we've got the elements in place, but we've got to be, again, intelligent in our use of those things. I think one of the underlying successes of social media is that increasingly people find their comfort zones and the subjects that they take delight in. Now, if traditional media and other forms of new media can adapt that and increasingly recognize this segmentalization that we talked about, break the audience up or the readers up and try to give each one what they need, I think we'll overcome this gloriously.
So thank you guys for a nice conversation, very insightful. So much for content is king, and I guess audiences would be Kong then. So we'll open up for some questions. We'll take 4 first, so it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we come this way.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is David Kaiser. I used to be a journalist in traditional media, but you wouldn't believe it, I'm probably glad that traditional media is facing the problems it's facing. Why am I being provocative? Well, I think an age has passed, and we have to acknowledge that. The age of hierarchies, of moral absolutes, of status structures, of taken for granted masculinities, that age is gone. And I think if any institution in the world today is asking questions about its survival, I think that's because it's still operating on the structures of a world which is dead already. We have to acknowledge this fact. Okay. But I'm sad that traditional media is dying. But it kind of seems odd, because when we were, quote unquote, growing up, that is going through the institutionalization that brought us to where we are sitting today, A good world was where everybody had an equal voice, where there was equal say in how things are handled. And that age is here, except we don't like it. I don't know why. Everybody's able to participate, you know, and put their voice out there without a mediator in between. Now, except this transformation is not facing just the media alone. If you look at talks about energy consumption, it's the same. If your business was based upon the traditional way of providing energy, you're in trouble. If it comes to transportation, if you had a taxi company that operates in a certain way, Uber is driving you out. You could go on and on and on and on. But why am I saying this? I think that a lot of the things we say about traditional media and how we can catch up, we're trying to negotiate our way, you know, thinking that if we did the old things in a better way, if we did it faster, in a smarter way, somehow we're going to escape the passage of time and of an age. Maybe we are wrong somewhere. Perhaps we need to begin to rethink what it means to be in the media. We talk about, if you look at here, a lot of the discussion, it's about how can we make money out of the system. Maybe something as an institution as important as the media should not have been monetized the way it has been monetized. That was part of my problem, because the process of monetizing the media, which accelerated immensely in the 1990s and about 10 years ago, is what, I mean, drove people like me out, okay? You can't report a story because, it's going to hurt an advertiser. So traditional media lost credibility. And maybe if we try to rethink what our relationship to society is, maybe we can begin to see changes in different ways. But to think we can do the old things better and still stay afloat, I think that's a fantasy.
Thanks. You guys will have to respond to whether traditional media is dead, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry you were thrown out because of a story.
Hi, my name is Stefan from South Africa. I'm curious to find out your views on fake news sites. Specifically in South Africa, we've seen a rise or a surge of fake news sites. This is not just articles that are fake, like the stories you were quoting, but sites that go out of their way, literally, their business model is to create sensational stories that would obviously be trending at the time, just for clicks and just for traffic. Is that a concern? And just your general views on that.
Thanks. Kamafisa?
Good evening. My name is Mildred Achoch. I'm a content creator. So we've talked a lot, or rather we've heard about African content, segmentation of audiences, and all that, all those good things. So my question is there a way that traditional media can reach out to citizen journalists and social media people so that it's a case of traditional media and new media, not traditional media or new media? Because if traditional media is looking for content, there's a lot of content online already. I'd just like to point out the good example of the trend from Nation. It is traditional media, but it uses a lot of new media. So I think there's just that need to reach out to citizen journalists and everyone who's on social media to look for good content so that we are working together. Thank you.
Just behind you. Just behind you.
Okay, it's just following on the same and what Mohapi brought out. The question I want to ask too actually is, firstly, how we can protect that space also, given most of the issues that you've brought out. How can we protect that online space? I wanted to get that from the panelists. And then we have issues, for example, the online space with social media is also becoming a heavily contested space. Of course, others are even now calling it perhaps the fifth estate and all those things. It's becoming, on the other hand, a vulnerable space also. It's becoming the new public sphere. And then with those issues that you've mentioned, so how do we protect? I ask that because in our context, like Zambia, for instance, we have this online publication, the Zambian Watchdog, which was very critical, which has so much going on. The government was after it. And we just recently had Facebook shutting them down, and you have so much that's going on. So to avoid media being sucked into such issues, how do we protect the space? And then the second question I had also was, do you think media have taken advantage of the digital migration process? Because if you look at some of the issues you brought out, talk of content, I think digital migration was one such opportunity in terms of merging or entering into the online space and trying to get those segments of the audiences. So do you think they've taken advantage of that? And then what are some of the other opportunities that traditional media should really be looking out for in this day and age?
Thanks, guys. I think you need to respond to that so we can take the other round. So your questions relate to what is your take on the fake news sites? Do you think that the mainstream or traditional media has taken advantage of the digitization, which I think a lot of African countries have actually, if you're looking at the actual digital migration process itself, I don't know whether you're referring to the broadcasting side or both in terms of online media. And then the other one is how do we reach out to content producers online as mainstream media?
So to begin with, fake news sites. Fake news, false news has always, again, been a concern. And of course, if it's easier for people to publish, everything gets bigger. The people publishing true news become more, but the people also faking news become more. But I think it's a concern that's best addressed by readers and everybody online becoming more literate about the media, becoming more picky with where you get from. Click through to the link. Don't share. I think that's going to be solved more by reader and audience habits and audience behavior than by anything else, because we used to have laws that punish false news, but those laws went counter to freedom of expression, rights, and all those things. And we worked hard to have those laws annulled. So we can't go back to, like somebody said earlier, the internet is part of the real world. Bad people exist in the real world as they do on the internet. Con men exist in the real world as they do on the internet. So as a person who is online, who is getting your news online, you do have to invest in some system of protecting yourself, even as a newspaper. They just became digital, fully digital a few years ago. So just become more literate, just have your own system, what's credible news, where do I go for just a laugh, and above all things, click through on the links and see who published this. Credibility, you judged mainstream media on credibility, legacy media on credibility, judge internet media on credibility too. Is there a way for traditional media to use citizen journalists? I think, of course, the extent to which different media use citizen journalists is different, but they do. I think we do. I think Twitter, for very many journalists, is a news source. It's where you go to know who is saying what. For people who are publishing online, you will find your tweets embedded in the stories they produce. There are entire stories that are based only on what conversations have been had online. So I think we are getting there too. I mean, we are investing. Even there are quite a number of journalists who are investing in even being able to mine social media data, to mine and report on it, not just then so and so said this and so said this. I think during the election here, a group of tons of citizen journalists too actually produced a number of stories about sentiments around the political debates, the presidential debates. Where did people come out? What people think? So I think that merger is happening. Of course, in the more resourced countries, better than it's happening here. But I'm confident that journalists, traditional journalists do see it do see citizen journalists online as a real news source. Here we have a lot of people collecting citizen voices via SMS and then publishing them, and maybe there needs to be more work around getting that then republished further down the chain in mainstream media. But it is happening, and I think we are going there. However, the caveat on that is that these companies themselves, they are businesses, and how much they give us access to your content. They are businesses, you have a relationship with them, their privacy issue, you have a privacy understanding with them. So how much access they give us to your content is in some ways limited. For instance, if I wanted to scrape Twitter data on a big conversation, so many times it would take like days, because Twitter doesn't want you to pull too much of people's data because it's their business, but also, they do have a relationship with the user that they don't necessarily have with a random journalist who is trying to pull what everybody said that day. Facebook only makes what you make public available to other parties. So if you're a citizen journalist who wants to be involved, who wants to be, more tapped into, that there are some adjustments on your side to make to, if you want it public, make it public. If you share it with your friends, unless one of your friends is only those among your friends, only those journalists who are also your friends will probably have access to it. But yeah, and I think in this context, we certainly need to work a lot more about getting voices, citizen voices that are not already online. Because that's the other thing, we talk about social media as if it's universal, but again, in this context, it's not anywhere near universal. So if people are starting to use WhatsApp a lot more actually than slightly more than they even use more than they use Twitter. So we do need to figure out, how do I get into people's WhatsApp groups without again becoming, a creepy person who yeah. So there are things to figure out, but we certainly do see the potential.
I just want to say something about David is, by the way, in my opinion, the finest writer of our generation. I had the pleasure to work with him and the pleasure to see him again today. And it's quite sad to see that he left. He's not alone. Many people have left the profession. It's like seeing a long dead relative, in another form. But, so David is right in the sense that the ivory tower, came crashing down a long time ago. The idea, just to give you a good example, it used to be very difficult to get the attention of a newspaper editor, or of a politician for that matter. Today you can tweet a president, say, look, why are you not doing this? Or why have you done this? Same thing with newspaper editors. So the power structure has changed, and in that, as that has changed, some media houses have probably taken decisions that were unwise. So, for instance, rather than siding with the people, with the audience, siding with their commercial partners. But the same thing has happened in religion. There are many people who have left religion because the people that claim to speak for God probably speak for their bank managers. We're seeing the emergence of alternative models. So things like ProPublica, for instance, things like WikiLeaks, where people, you can argue, is that a journalistic enterprise? Is it, just a data dump? But the media houses that will survive are those that retain their credibility and the confidence that their audiences have in them, and that are able to get their audiences to pay for good content that allows them to be sustainable businesses.
Thank you, Thomas. You just keep it very short.
Yeah.
And Eric?
Well, anyway, I will just take on what David had actually thrown on us. Thanks for your compliments on David. But then I do not agree that the traditional media is dying. I think we must always try to understand the evolution of the traditional media. Now, prior to independence, the media have been utilized by African journalists as a tool to fight for independence. The Azikwes, the Nkrumahs, and so on, even in Kenya with Jomo Kenyatta. They established papers that were able to fight for the attainment of independence for Africa. Now, these were journalists producing content. Now, in the last 10 years or so, what we have seen in Africa is that business Mongols have entered into the media. Now, these are people who have the money, who have the financial capital to be able to establish the best television stations, and they have come in to the profession and they have been able to establish good radio stations. Now, there is an agenda in the establishment of these media houses. It is either essentially to make profit or to support a particular political agenda. These have been the basic fact. And I must say, in doing this, journalists have faced some difficult times because you have to toe the line of the editor, who has a special mandate from the media owner to do whatever he wants to support a particular political agenda, and this has created a lot of problems in journalism. But we cannot stand and say that traditional media is dying. I think it is not dying. With every new generation, there comes a challenge that is unique. And the traditional media have been able to overcome all these challenges within a space of time. And I believe that the internet and social media, as the internet and social media have emerged, the traditional media will continue to survive, because I personally believe that the old can always give or create space within the new. It's the new that will always find a space, how to lift and carry up the old, but the old can always create a space for the new. Now, secondly, on the issue of the fake news websites in Southern Africa, these are very worrying, and I have always said this has nothing to do with journalism. Like recently, I saw one which says that Thabo Mbeki was dead. I'm sorry to repeat this thing here. And this is creating a lot of discouragement on online readers, because people are now beginning to question. So a large number of people are saying that whatever news item that is created online is not true, which is not the fact. Of course, there are news items that are created online which are true, but then the deliberate attempt in creating false news is very worrying concerning the online media. I'll stop and give over to him.
Thank you. I just ended my call on time. Very quick responses. I know I've got 30 seconds. First of all, with regard to David's question, the question about, I totally agree with Tomasi here. I'll tell you, David, the more you run, what is said about the more things change, the more they stay the same. You'd keep running around this globe, and then you'd find yourself one day from where you started. So just run fast enough so you can get there quickly, But no, I don't think, we're in an age of reinvention, and you're going to be seeing a lot of that. You'll see the newspapers. When movies came, they thought radio was dead, and when, and film was dead. But these entities are still around, and they'll continue to be around for a long time. I think it's all a matter of reinvention and understanding, the dynamism of the process, and reinventing oneself to survive in every new context. I love the question about fake news. Do you know, Mohapi, somebody might become president of the United States, right? Who's just thrived on the fake. Guys never told the truth in anything. I think there's value in what's fake, man, and you just have to, again, absorb that and make the most of it. I don't think, there'll always be false news. It gives us, it's fun, we laugh. In some cases, we cry if it's somebody who's dead. but then we move on, and the facts remain, and life goes on. I have totally no problem with that. And then with regard to incorporating social, like the citizen reporter and what we do, yes, I think they're part of that landscape, and we have to accept it. They're very much a part of that landscape, and the good media mogul today will have to figure out how they can use them. I mean, there's an outfit in Mauritius. It's a newspaper called L'Express, The Express. Google that when you have time, and see how they've built in the new and the old. The oldest guy in the newsroom started in 1963. And when things became too high-tech for him, he wanted to move out. They told him, no. You're an institutional memory. You'll have to fit into this the new circumstances. And they forced him into some kind of training, and he was heading one of the departments and doing an efficient job. The Express, for me, in this outfit in Mauritius, is the future. And they've somehow maintained all three. So, just take a look at that. And finally, is media taking advantage of digital migration? I think there's a battle in the heart of journalism today. And it's being defined by these very strong forces. The traditionalists who want to keep things as they are, the digital innovators who want to keep things moving, and we'll just have to find the middle ground.
Thanks, guys. We'll take the last round of questions. If you could say who the question is directed to, and try and cut down on the narration so that it's swifter and, yeah.
Thank you to the panel for the discussion so far. My question would be directed to Eric and Tomasi, yes. I had a conversation on banking and questioning whether banks are still relevant now in the era where you have financial institutions coming up that are able to fund new ideas. And so, in the same sense, the thing would be that banking will always be relevant, but banks may not necessarily be relevant. So that shift in things would be ideal in this sense. It's that information will always be relevant. The channel through which that information is shared may be diverse. So is it still relevant for media to have that division of traditional media and new media? Because in my sense, being a journalist myself, that is part of the problem. Defining ourselves as traditional media and digital media, why can't it just be media that is able to adapt to the new way of relaying information? Because at the core of our profession is being able to deliver credible information. And so when you have a platform that allows you to do your job more efficiently, why should it become a problem and you insist on holding on to old systems? So I would like to find out if that is part of the problem and what your sentiments would be in that regard. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rose Bell Kagumire. I have a question for Eric. It's more on how the internet has enabled African citizens actually to join together to kind of have online publications that were never before. We did not have many Pan-African, publications where many citizens, different countries actually can, you can read about each country from one publication with in-depth analysis. And where are we going? What are the models? Because that's one of the crippling, I think, things on the continent, that we don't have powerful media that covers actually in-depth our stories, but we have seen opportunities online. And the other is to Daniel, and it's more about Ugandan media and adapting to the digital age, because most times, we come to conferences and talk about these things, but when you go back to watch your TV or read newspapers, things are still, very, very far back and who is informing these newsrooms? Because you watch TV, we do not have a separate. If you ask media houses in Uganda, how many do have a digital desk, and who informs what a digital desk is? Because the same stuff you watch on TV is the same stuff they pile online, and there seems to be a lack of understanding of online audiences in Uganda. They just, they simply cut and paste, and we're still at that level. So, and this is not rocket science. Other people are doing it out of the continent, and somehow we are still seated somehow comfortably, even as things go on. So I'm wondering, what's your own outlook, not only for TVs, but also newspapers? What's different from what you publish and what is online? How do you have digital departments? Thank you.
Thanks. There were hands up front. Behan's hand is up right here. And then we'll have Thomas, and that will be the last one.
Thank you. My name is Berhana, Mozilla Open Web Fellow. My question is to Lydia and Tomasi. So when you say that the mainstream media is dead, so for me as an Ethiopian, the mainstream media is dead to me because it doesn't apply to our context. It has betrayed us. It's either part of the government, or the people that are good journalists are either in prison or in exile. So we have to insanely depend on social media to crowdsource our information. So what is your perspective on that? And yeah, the betrayal of the...
Can you repeat the question and speak a little bit slower, please?
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm saying that in the Ethiopian context, the mainstream media is dead to us because it's either controlled by the government, or the journalists that were good are either in prison or in exile. So as an Ethiopian, I predominantly depend on the social media basically to crowdsource my information. And yeah, how do you see that, and what is the role of the mainstream media in making sure that those sort of things don't happen?
Right, Thomas. And
Thank
then
you.
my
My first question goes to Eric. Have you explored in your different stations of work convergence as a business model, especially in Africa? Do we have innovative examples where convergence can actually be explored as a way of addressing this challenge? To me, it's a question of the message and the messenger. I think that's where the question really is. Should we worry much about the messenger, or should we concentrate on the message? I think if we can find an answer there, then we have a solution. Thank you.
That's the last one, yeah.
Thank you. Barak Otieno from Kiktonet again. I would just like to hear from Eric and Daniel their perspective as to whether social media has made the society to better appreciate mainstream media, because we are seeing a lot of challenges with social media, and we seem to be appreciating sort of the brick and mortar system that the traditional media offered. But maybe I would hear from the experts their opinion on this.
Right, Lydia?
So was the question from Ethiopia mine to answer? Yeah. All right. So I think we should go back a little bit to what she says. Should we continue speaking about mainstream media, traditional media, legacy media, or are we just the media? Because what we call mainstream media here was made by its audiences. If you have an audience, they trust you, they turn to you for news, and you recognize that responsibility and take it seriously, I think you deserve the media badge as much as anybody else. There was never any further science to it. And so I think, yes, it is time to retire legacy media, mainstream media, because we need to remember, we weren't selling newsprint, we were always selling information, right? We weren't selling TVs, we were always selling their content. So if we're still getting the content there, and if you do, and I think that's one of the real democratic advantages of digital media, is it's not as easy for the government, for a government that so wishes, to control it. Yeah, you cut off one head, another grows up, and that's a real thing. We would have loved to have that in our days when we called ourselves mainstream media. You see that sometimes, you know, they close the brick and mortar. I think a few years ago when 2 media houses were closed down, and at least one of them printed their paper from the bush and really bragged about it. And I think they got even, you know, like a sales boost out of it. So these things that are happening here, these are things we dreamt of. So I don't think the fact that the news source from which you get your news doesn't have an office that can be pointed out makes it any less credible. It always comes down to, is the information credible? Is that journalist taking their responsibility and the trust you have put in them seriously and doing their best to make sure what they pass on is credible? So I think that frees us from even worrying too much about distribution channels. But we do still, to go back to her question, we worry about distribution channels because we had a way of collecting money off of those off of the old distribution channels, and we need to be alive and we need to have food in the stomachs to write, to pass on that information. So that question is never going to completely go away, whether we're distributing news on newsprint or on a TV or on a computer, we still will always worry about, okay, but how do we collect a toll off of that? So that, I guess that's why in some ways we are obsessed about the channels, and yeah, but it goes to business, not to credibility of their information.
Yeah, let me just add. Okay, sorry. Now, it's concerning our sister from Ethiopia. Now, I quite agree with you on the repressive nature of the mainstream media and what African governments have been able to inflict on journalists who are from the mainstream media. And what I will tell you is, governments have created a lot of damage in terms of imprisonment and killing with impunity of journalists and so on and so forth. But there is a new trend. We are engaging on a study on media laws in Africa. And within the past 3 years, what we have seen is that governments in Africa are now legislating more obnoxious legislations towards social media than even the traditional media. Now, the type of laws you have that governments are now legislating on social media is much more severe than what you have for the traditional media. Now, for example, in the Gambia, about 2 years ago, a bill was passed which talked about false information concerning government civil servants on the internet. And it defined these things very loosely to the extent that it does not say news. It talks about information on the internet, which means that if I discuss issues concerning a minister or concerning corruption in a particular ministry with you on Facebook, I can be charged under that law. And it has a penalty of up to 15 years imprisonment for journalists and a charge of almost about $100,000 for anybody who is liable onto this law. So I think the issue is that African governments are not comfortable with the media. That's the truth, because the media is exposing corruption, the media is exposing human rights violation, both the traditional media and the new media. It is African governments that have a problem. If you look at what is happening in Africa today, governments have deliberately designed strategies to keep out independent newspapers by ensuring that they do not finance independent newspapers through advertising. Governments deliberately refuse their departments to advertise on the independent newspaper because this is to break them down financially. And more or less, they take you to court and then, try to impose heavy charges on you so that you can basically shut down. So it's the governments that have a problem. And if social media, if news on the social media will rise up to the level where where traditional media is, you will see a different thing altogether, because governments are coming, because we have governments that don't want to leave power. We see what is happening in DRC. Look at Central Africa in general. It's almost going tatters because you have sit-tight governments. You know, go to West Africa, that is the same thing that is happening. And people are now trying to fight on this. And the greatest platform is social media. I can tell you, within the next few years, we'll see more severe repressions on people who use social media in terms of news dissemination. Now, if I can just move to the lady here who mentioned about why do we have to separate the media? Why can't we just say media? I would just say that it will be more confusing if we say media to generalize everything, because the media itself has different components. Then the media itself also has different characteristics and functions, because every media is entitled to do something that is unique. Now, for example, what radio can do in terms of broadcasting in Africa, I don't think be substitution to it within the next 50 years. Because if you look at the context of Africa, if you look at the context of our ethnicity, if you look at the context of our languages, radio has been one medium that can cut across barriers in all these issues. And it will be difficult to have a replacement concerning rural. The majority of our populations are not educated. With crossing the language barrier, they are able to listen to, from the radio, they will be able to listen on a language that they understand. And I was surprised this morning, somebody said that I think it was our man from Tanzania who said that in terms of usage, Africa, we are talking of 16%, you know, and that's serious, because I know in terms of the media, more Africans listen to radio than any other thing. So I think it will still go to leave it as it is. The problem is with the new media, there will always be that shift, that confrontation between profit and public interest. There is a large issue concerning the commercialization of the news on the new media. And this thing in relation to the traditional media have to battle between profit and public interest. Now, what do we prefer? Do we prefer a media that will actually make profit and give us false news, or give us a content that we are not satisfied with? Or do we prefer a media that will actually address the public interest issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. That was very insightful. Daniel, your question? I'm sorry, Eric, you'll have to close the session.
There were just two questions from me. Rosebell asking about the state of digital media in Uganda. Look, in most news, the digital space emerged, our response was to appoint someone and then say we have someone in charge of digital, you know. Then there was a website. So if you got asked, you know, in the board, you say, you know, we've actually appointed someone in charge of digital. It's now changed. The pressure is more real. But don't forget that, you know, the things that you see elsewhere, you know, sometimes take a bit of time to get here. It's still, speaking about Uganda, it's still pretty much a small country, small poor country that probably has first world appetites or middle income appetites. It will get here. There was a question from Barack about social media helping society appreciate traditional media better. Not enough. Every time I see one of those fake stories, as a traditional journalist, so to speak, if that still exists, I'm quite happy, because people then, you know, when I see people sending around fake stories, I'm quite happy. I'm the guy kind of in the back of the room sniggering and thinking, let's have more of this, so that hopefully, you know, people will realize that not everything that's out there is actually real, that I need to find a credible, you know, media house that I can go to. The only problem is if your own newspaper or publication carries it, then someone needs to be looking for a new job.
Thanks, Eric. Eric is closing the session for us as well.
Thanks. You know, I think the questions actually rounded up the session very well, you know, because it came down to, is it about banking or is it about banks? You know, is it about the messages or is it about the channels that carry the message, you know? And I think we're going to stay in that debate for quite a while. And it should be a healthy debate. It's something we should talk about and try to figure out, are we really, what is it that people come to media for? They come to media for those messages. So how do we give them what they need? It's ultimately going to come down to that. So if there's one lesson coming out of this session, and I hope out of this ongoing exercise, it is that media in whatever form is needed, but media should respond. We're just intermediators. We are not the end game. We are the middle men and women, the middle people. So we're taking a certain set of goods and we're delivering them. And that's what it should be all about. And our task in the middle is to figure out through what window we deliver those goods. And the challenge is to get it right. Because if you take the letter from, you know, that's meant for B and it finds itself with C, C will not either throw it away, not know what to do with it, or just send it back. So I think, which is in many ways the purpose of this debate, to be a little more specific. For example, the last question about, you know, whether social media is putting traditional media in a better light. My answer to that, honestly, and I was thinking about it, is no. Online media is doing what it should do. But what is it doing to traditional media? It is challenging traditional media to rise up. There's need for that. You know, sloppy writing is no longer good enough for those who go to the newspaper because they hope to read something good. It's no longer good enough. So you've got to sit up. Getting to the facts as opposed to what's all over the place in social media, that is part of the essence of traditional media today. And so on. So we need to go down to the nitty-gritties. We need to figure out what it is we really stand for and proclaim it. Nothing is going to go away. I can guarantee you in 50 years, we'll be reading newspapers. In 100 years, we'll be hearing radios and we'll be watching television. So I'll stop it at that.
Right, thank you. Weren't they just great? You can give them a round of applause. And a lot of takeaways as well. Reminders that we were never selling newsprint. Suggestions that content is king. Threats that we're reading newspapers in 50 years. I don't want to do that. I want to be online. And then also, I think a very good takeaway from Thomas being we need to sit down and reflect on what it is that we want. A paper that makes money but doesn't verify and give us the news that is authentically newsworthy. And so I think this has been a really good session. Thank you so much, guys. And also just a reminder that we have the cocktail at 6 o'clock, and I think we've surpassed our time, so just a few minutes to get ready and join everyone else. Thank you for being here.